Revelation 2:12 introduces Pergamum, the city where Jesus is writing to Christian believers in the midst of some persecution, some pressure, and Jesus presents himself as the one who has the sharp two-edged sword. So let's read this verse and figure out what does it mean and how do I apply it to my life. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum write the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. So, things that we need to be aware of when we look at the Pergamum believers. They were dealing with the altar to Zeus that overlooked the city. They had the Asclepion, which was a hospital complex where the god Asclepius was worshipped, and they practiced modern medicine. They did both. They mingled those two together. Certainly, the temple to the Roman emperor was a major deal to the Christians there, and I'll talk about all three of those in the next verse when we talk about Satan's throne. Also in Pergamum, there was a massive library, 200,000 documents on parchment. In fact, we get our word parchment from the word Pergamum. So these people were very much into words and ideas, and this no doubt had some impact on the Christian believers that were trying to hold fast to their faith in Pergamum. I think probably one of the most remarkable things when we're looking at this particular verse is to understand in Pergamum, the symbol of their city was the sword. Rome had given them the ability to exercise capital punishment. So this city had a lot of power, and it's not something that Rome did with a lot of their cities. But the believers in this particular city would have been keenly aware that you don't want to raise too much trouble here because this city has the power to really come against troublemakers as they perceive them very hard. So it's no surprise to us that Jesus would come to the Pergamum believers who are facing intimidation of the city of Pergamum, who bears the sword, the ability to execute. Jesus says, I am coming to you believers in this city as the one who has the sharp double-edged sword. So Jesus has a sword of his own that he's bringing to the attention to the Pergamum believers. Now we know that the sword is the word of God. Hebrews 4:12 says that the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, piercing to the dividing of joint and marrow, soul and spirit, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. In Revelation 19, verse 15, Jesus overcame his enemies, those who were coming against him, standing against him, with the word of his mouth. So there is a tremendous amount of power in the sword that Jesus is bringing. In fact, the sword that Jesus brings, he uses to execute judgment on his enemies. And he gives freedom to his followers. The Bible is very clear that it is the truth that sets us free. And if the Son sets us free, we'll be free indeed. So we can be free from these sources of intimidation, fear, false ideas, concepts, ideologies, all these things that the Pergamum believers were facing. Jesus comes bearing his own sword. So application-wise, it is very important for us to understand if Jesus' connection point to these believers is the sword of his mouth in a city where they were facing the sword themselves, Jesus is undoubtedly saying to them, you have to choose the sword that you're going to fear. And over through the Bible, God says, do not fear, do not be afraid, do not be intimidated. We cannot follow Jesus from a position of fear. We have to follow Jesus from a position of faith. And when we place our faith in Jesus and understand he gives life without end, that he holds our destiny, that everything is under his sovereign control and nothing can happen to us outside of his will. And I'm not saying that he protects us from all harm and all suffering, but we have to trust him so deeply, knowing that he is good, he is trustworthy, he is strong, he is capable, and he has called us to follow him in relationship and in mission. We as followers of Jesus choose to fear him alone and not to fear the things of this world. When we follow Jesus from this position of faith and peace and rest, we will be able to overcome the sources of intimidation and fear. And the point of the letters that Jesus wrote to the churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 is just that, that we would be overcomers, that we would not be stopped because of deception, fear, intimidation, the lust and draw of the world. None of these things. We keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and we overcome all these obstacles to our faith.